Welcome to WikiRead. Today we're going to read the Wikipedia article about Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering, colloquially known as Magic Cards, Magic, or just MTG, is a collectible and digital collectible card game created by Richard Garfield, released in 1993 by Wizards of the Coast, now a subsidiary of Hasbro. Magic was the first trading card game and has approximately 20 million players as of 2015, and over 20 billion Magic cards produced in the period between 2008 and 2016, during which time it grew in popularity. Each game of Magic represents a battle between wizards known as planeswalkers, who cast spells, use artifacts, and summon creatures as depicted on individual cards in order to defeat their opponents, typically, but not always, by draining them of their 20 starting life points in the standard format. Although the original concept of the game drew heavily from the motifs of traditional fantasy role-playing games such as Dungeons & Dragons, the gameplay bears little similarity to pencil and paper adventure games, while simultaneously having substantial more cards and more complex rules than many other card games. Magic can be played by two or more players, either in person with printed cards, or on a computer, smartphone, or tablet with virtual cards through internet-based software, Magic the Gathering Online, or other video games such as Magic the Gathering Arena. It can be played in various rule formats, which fall into two main categories: constructed and limited. Limited formats involve players building a deck spontaneously out of a pool of random cards with a minimum deck size of 40 cards. In constructed formats, players create decks from cards they own, usually with a minimum of 60 cards per deck. New cards are released on a regular basis through expansion sets. An organized tournament system, the DCI, played at the international level, and a worldwide community of professional Magic players has developed, as well as substantial resale market for Magic cards. Certain cards can be monetarily valuable due to their rarity in production and utility in gameplay, with prices ranging from a few cents to thousands of dollars. Gameplay. A game of Magic involves two or more players who are engaged in a battle acting as powerful wizards called planeswalkers. Each player has their own deck, either one previously constructed or made from a limited pool of cards for the event. A player starts the game with 20 life points and loses the game when their life total is reduced to 0. A player can also lose if they must draw from an empty deck. In addition, some cards specify other ways to win or lose the game. Garfield has stated that two major influences in his creation of Magic the Gathering were the game's Cosmic Encounter, which first used the concept that normal rules could sometimes be overridden, and Dungeons & Dragons. The golden rule of Magic states that whenever a card's text directly contradicts the rules, the card takes precedence. The comprehensive rules, a detailed rulebook, exists to clarify conflicts. Cards in Magic the Gathering fall into generally two classes, lands and spells. Lands provide mana or magical energy, which is used as magical fuel when the player attempts to cast spells. Players can only play one land per turn, with most land providing a specific color of mana when they are tapped, usually by rotating the card 90 degrees to show it has been used that turn, with each land only able to be tapped for mana once per turn. Spells consume mana, typically with at least one or more mana of a specific color. More powerful spells cost more mana, so the game progresses. More land will be in play, more mana will be available, and the quantity and relative power of the spells played tends to increase. Spells come in several varieties. Non-permanents, like sorceries and instants, have a single, one-time effect before they go to the graveyard, discard pile. Enchantments and artifacts that remain in play after being cast to provide a lasting effect. Creatures, spells, summon creatures that can attack and damage an opponent as well as used to defend from opponent's creature attacks. Land, enchantments, artifacts, and creature cards are considered permanents as they remain in play until removed by other spell, ability, or combat effects. The set Lorwyn introduced the new Planeswalker card type, which represents powerful allies who fight with their own magic abilities. Additionally, cards are printed and available within certain rarities, known as common, uncommon, rare, and mythic rare, with generally more powerful cards having higher rarities. Players begin the game by shuffling their decks and then drawing 7 cards. On each player's turn, following a set phase order, they draw a card, tap their lands, turning them sideways, and other permanents as necessary to gain mana as to cast spells, engage their creatures in a single attack round against their opponent who may use their own creatures to block the attack, and then complete other actions with any remaining mana. Tapped resources remain tapped until the start of the player's next turn, which may leave them without land to draw for mana to cast spells in reaction to their opponent, or without creatures to block attacks. So the player must plan ahead for their opponent's turn. Most actions that a player can perform enter the stack, a concept similar to the stack in computer programming, as either player can react to those actions with other actions, such as counterspells. The stack provides a method of resolving complex interactions that may result in certain scenarios. Deck construction. Deck building requires strategy as players must choose among thousands of cards which they want to play. This requires players to evaluate the power of their cards as well as the possible synergies between them and their possible interactions with the card they expect to play against. This metagame can vary in different locations or time periods. The choice of cards is usually narrowed by the player deciding which colors they want to include in the deck. This decision is a key part of creating a deck. In general, reducing the number of colors used increases the consistency of play and the probability of drawing the lands needed to cast one's spells, at the expense of restricting the range of tactics available to the player. Part of the Magic product line has been starter decks, which are aimed to provide novice players with ideas for deck building. Most sanctioned events for Magic the Gathering under the DCI use the base constructed format that require players to build their own decks from their own library of cards. In general, this requires a minimum of 60 cards in the deck, and except for basic land cards, no more than 4 of the same name card. The pool of cards is typically limited to the standard rotation, which consists of the base sets and expansions that have been released in the last 2 years. The standard format helps to prevent power creep that can be difficult to predict with the size of the Magic card library and help give newer players a fair advantage with long-term players. Other constructed formats exist that allow for use of older expansions to give more variety of decks. A large variety of formats have been defined by DCI that allow different pools of expansions to be used or alter deck construction rules for special events. Individual cards may be listed as restricted, where only one copy can be included in a deck, or simply banned at the DCI's discretion. These limitations are usually for balance or of power reasons, but have been occasionally made because of gameplay mechanics. For example, with the elimination of the play for anti mechanics in all formats, all such cards with this feature are banned. More recently, older cards have been banned from all formal play by Wizards due to inappropriate racial or cultural depictions in their illustrations in the wake of the George Floyd protests, and their images removed from the various online Magic databases explaining this. This included the Invoke Prejudice card, which was displayed on the official card index site Gatherer at a web URL ending in 1488, numbers that are synonymous with white supremacy. In the limited format, a small number of cards are open for play from booster packs or tournament packs, and a minimum deck size of 40 cards is enforced. The most popular limited format is Booster Draft, in which players open a booster pack, choose a card from it, and pass it to the player seated next to them. This continues until all cards have been picked and then a new pack is opened. 3 packs are opened all together, and the direction of passing alternates left, right, left. Once the draft is done, players create 40 card decks out of the cards they picked, basic land cards being provided for free, and play games with the players they drafted with. Colors of Magic. Most cards in Magic are based on one of 5 colors that make up the game's color wheel or color pie, shown on the back of each card, and each representing a school or realm of magic: white, blue, black, red, and green. The arrangement of these colors on the wheel describe relationships between the schools, which can broadly affect deck construction and game execution. For a given color, such as white, the 2 colors immediate adjacent to it, green and blue, are considered complementary. When the 2 colors on the opposite side, black and red, are its opposite schools. The Research and Development R&D team at Wizards of the Coast aimed to balance power and abilities among the 5 colors by using the color pie to differentiate the strengths and weaknesses of each. This guideline lays out the capabilities, themes, and mechanics of each color and allows for every color to have its own distinct attributes and gameplay. The color pie is used to ensure new cards are thematically in the correct color and do not infringe on the territory of other colors. The concepts behind each of the colors on the color wheel, based on the series of articles written by Mark Rosewater, are as follows. White represents order, peace, and light, and draws mana from planes. White planeswalkers can summon individually weak characters that are collectively strong as a group, such as soldiers, as well as powerful creatures and leaders that can impart buffs across all of the player's creatures. Their spells tend to focus on healing or preventing damage, protecting their allies, and neutralizing advantages on the battlefield by their opponents. Blue represents intellect, logic, manipulation, and trickery, and pulls its mana from islands. Its magic is typically associated with the classical elements of air and water. Many of Blue's spells can interact or interfere with the opponent's spells, as well as with the general flow of the game. Blue's magic is also associated with control, allowing the player to gain temporary or full control of the opponent's creatures. Blue creatures often tend to be weak but evasive and difficult to target. Black represents power, death, corruption, and sacrifice, drawing mana from swamps. Many of Black's creatures are undead, and several can be sacrificed to make other creatures more powerful, destroy opponents' creatures or permanents, or other effects. Black creatures may be able to draw the life taken in an attack back to their caster, or may even be able to kill creatures through a death touch effect. Black creatures similarly coerce sacrifice by the player or their opponent through cards or life. Red represents freedom, chaos, fury, warfare, pulling its power from mountains. Its powers are associated with classical fire and earth elements and tend to have the strongest spells such as fireballs that can be powered up by tapping additional mana when cast. Red is an offensive-oriented class. In addition to powerful creatures like dragons, red planeswalkers can summon weak creatures that can strike quickly to gain the short-term edge. Green is the color of life, nature, evolution, and indulgence, drawing mana from forests. Green has the widest array of creatures to draw upon, ranging across all power levels, and generally is able to dominate the battlefield with many creatures in play at once. Green creatures and spells can generate life points and mana, and also gain massive strength through spells. Most cards in Magic the Gathering are based on a single color, shown along the card's border. The cost to play them requires some mana of that color and potentially any amount of mana from any other color. Multicolored cards were introduced in the Legends expansion and typically use a golden border. Their casting cost includes mana from at least 2 different colors, plus additional mana from any other color. Hybrid cards, included with Ravnica, use a 2-color gradient border. These cards can be cast using mana from either color shown in addition to the other mana costs. Finally, colorless cards, such as some artifacts, do not have any colored mana requirements, but still require a general amount of mana to be spent to play. The color wheel can influence deck construction choices. Cards from colors that are aligned, such as red and green, often provide synergistic effects, either due to the core nature of the schools or through designs of cards, but may leave the deck vulnerable to the magic of the common color in conflict, blue in the case of red and green. Alternatively, decks constructed with opposing colors like green and blue may not have many favorable combinations, but will be capable of dealing with decks based on any other colors. There are no limits on how many colors can be in a deck, but the more colors in a deck, the more difficult it may be to provide mana to the right color. Luck versus skill. Magic, like many other games, combines chance and skill. One frequent complaint about the game involves the notion that there is too much luck involved, especially concerning possessing too many or too few lands. Early in the game especially, too many or too few lands could ruin a player's chance at victory without the player having made a mistake. This in-game statistical variance can be minimized by proper deck construction, as an appropriate land count can reduce mana problems. In Duels of the Planeswalkers 2012, the land count is automatically adjusted to 40% of the total deck size. A mulligan rule was introduced into the game, first informally in casual play and then in the official game rules. The most current mulligan rule allows players to shuffle an unsatisfactory opening hand back into the deck at the start of the game, drawing a new hand with the same number of cards, and repeat until satisfied, after which any player who has mulliganed will put cards from the hand they kept on the bottom of their deck equal to the number of times they mulliganed. In multiplayer, a player may take one mulligan without penalty, while subsequent mulligans will still cost 1 card, a rule known as partial Paris mulligan. The original mulligan allowed a player a single redraw of 7 cards if that player's initial hand contained 7 or 0 lands. A variation of this rule, called a forced mulligan, is still used in some casual play circles and in multiplayer formats on Magic Online, and allows a single free redraw of 7 new cards if a player's initial hand contains 6, 7, 1, or 0 lands. With the release of the core set 2020, a new mulligan system was introduced for competitive play known as the London Mulligan. Confessing his love for games combining both luck and skill, Magic creator Richard Garfield admitted its influence in his design of Magic. In addressing the complaint about luck influencing a game, Garfield states that new and casual players tend to appreciate luck as a leveling effect, since randomness can increase their chances of winning against a more skilled player. Meanwhile, a player with higher skills appreciates a game with less chance, as the higher degree of control increases their chances of winning. According to Garfield, Magic has and would likely continue decreasing its degree of luck as the game matured. The Mulligan rule, as well as card design, past versus present, are good examples of this trend. He feels that this is a universal trend for maturing games. Garfield explained, using chess as an example, that unlike modern chess, its predecessors, players would use dice to determine which chess piece to move. Gambling. The original set of rules prescribed that all games were to be played for ante. Garfield was partially inspired by the game of marbles and wanted folks to play with the cards rather than collect them. For Magic, each player removed a card at random from the deck they wished to play with, and the 2 cards would be set aside as the ante. At the end of the match, the winner would take and keep both cards. Early sets included a few cards with rules designed to interact with this gambling aspect, allowing replacements of cards up for ante, adding more cards to the ante, or even permanently trading ownership of cards in play. The ante concept became controversial because many regions had restrictions on games of chance. The rule was later made optional because of these restrictions and because of players' reluctance to possibly lose a card that they owned. The gambling rule is forbidden at sanctioned events and now is mostly a relic of the past, though it still sees occasional usage in friendly games as well as the prismatic format. The last card to mention Ante was printed in the 1995 expansion set, Homelands. That concludes this video on Magic the Gathering from the Wikipedia article. We reviewed the overview and the gameplay sections. If you enjoyed this, please leave a like, comment, or subscribe, and let me know which Wikipedia article you'd like me to review and read next. Thanks!